The stars looked different today. Commander Zarakith stood on the bridge of her massive warship and watched the distant blue planet through the viewing screen. Earth hung there like a small jewel in the darkness of space. She had seen many worlds like this one before, green and blue and full of life that would soon be gone. Zarakith was tall and strong like all her people. Her skin was gray like polished stone, and her eyes glowed with a soft purple light. She wore armor made from crystals that could stop any weapon her enemies might use against her. For 300 years, she had led the armies of the Vorthok Empire from one world to another. Each planet fell before her ships arrived to land on the surface. Behind her stood Captain Thokmar, her second in command. He was reading reports from their scout ships that had been watching Earth for many cycles. The humans were weak and primitive, just like all the others. They had simple weapons that could barely damage a Vorthok fighter ship. Their space vessels moved slowly, and their defenses were laughable. "Commander, the fleet reports all ships ready for attack," Thokmar said in their harsh language. "The humans have detected our presence, but they cannot stop us. Their largest weapons are like tiny stings against our shields." Zarakith nodded slowly. She had heard these same words 47 times before, on 47 different worlds. The pattern never changed. First came fear when the aliens realized they were not alone in the universe. Then came desperate attempts to communicate or negotiate. Finally came the hopeless last battle, where the primitive species threw everything they had against the Vorthok fleet. The humans were following the same path. Their radio signals filled space with panicked chatter. Their military forces were moving into defensive positions around their planet. Some of their ships were even trying to reach the Vorthok fleet to attempt some kind of dialogue. It was all so predictable and pointless. "How long until we reach their outer defenses?" Zarakith asked. 2 standard hours, Commander. Their moon base appears to be their strongest position. After we destroy it, the planet will have no protection. Zarakith had studied the intelligence reports carefully. Earth was home to over 7 billion humans. They were a young species that had only recently learned to leave their home world. Their technology was at least 500 years behind Vorthok science. They still used chemical rockets to move through space and primitive computers to control their weapons. The humans called themselves many different names and lived in separate groups that often fought each other. This made them even weaker because they could not unite against a common enemy. Some groups had better weapons than others, but none of them could challenge even the smallest Vorthok vessel. What interested Zarakith most was how the humans had spread across their planet. They built cities everywhere and changed the landscape to suit their needs. They were like a disease that consumed everything around them. This made them perfect candidates for elimination rather than slavery. The Vorthok Empire needed clean worlds for expansion, not planets filled with troublesome inhabitants. On Earth, Captain Jake Morrison sat in the command center of Luna Base 1, humanity's most advanced military facility. The base was built inside a crater on the far side of the moon, hidden from Earth but with clear views of deep space. Jake stared at the displays showing the approaching alien fleet. The ships were enormous, each one larger than the biggest human. Jake was 42 years old and had spent his entire adult life preparing for this moment. Not specifically for alien invasion, but for the defense of humanity against any threat. He had fought in 3 different wars on Earth and commanded space missions to Mars and the asteroid belt. Nothing in his experience had prepared him for what he saw on the screens. The alien fleet consisted of over 200 ships arranged in perfect formation. The largest vessel was clearly the command ship, a massive triangle of black metal and glowing crystal that dwarfed everything around it. Smaller ships surrounded it like guards protecting their queen. Energy readings from the fleet showed power levels that human science could barely measure. "Sir, we're receiving communications from Earth Command," said Lieutenant Amy Foster, the base communications officer. Admiral Sullivan wants to know if we can identify any weaknesses in their formation. Jake studied the tactical display. The aliens were approaching slowly and deliberately, as if they had all the time in the world. Their formation was precise but not defensive. They clearly did not consider humanity a real threat. This was both insulting and possibly useful information. "Tell the Admiral that they're not even trying to protect themselves," Jake said. "Either they're completely confident in their shields and armor, or they think we're too primitive to hurt them." The truth was probably both. Jake had seen the preliminary analysis of the alien ships. Their hulls were made from materials that human weapons could not penetrate. Their energy shields could absorb the full power of a nuclear weapon without any visible damage. Even if humanity used every weapon they possessed at the same time, it would barely scratch the paint on one enemy ship. But Jake Morrison had not survived 3 wars by giving up when the odds were bad. He had learned that every enemy had weaknesses, even if those weaknesses were not obvious at first glance. The key was finding the right moment and the right method to exploit whatever gaps existed in their defenses. The alien fleet continued its steady approach toward Earth. Soon the real battle would begin, and humanity would face its greatest test. Jake Morrison prepared his forces for a fight they could not win, hoping to at least make it costly for the invaders. He had no idea that his actions in the coming battle would change, not just his own fate, but the destiny of every living being in the galaxy. The first human ships died in silence. Their nuclear missiles exploded harmlessly against alien shields, while energy beams tore through their hulls like paper. Captain Jake Morrison watched from Luna Base as humanity's finest warships became clouds of burning debris in seconds. The alien fleet had not even slowed down. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood in the Earth Defense Command, centered deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. Banks of screens showed the battle unfolding in space above. Each red dot that disappeared from the display represented hundreds of brave souls who had volunteered for this suicide mission. The aliens were destroying human forces faster than her computers could track the losses. "Admiral, the Mars Defense Fleet is requesting permission to engage," reported Colonel Danny Wright, her tactical officer. "They want to try a flanking maneuver, while the aliens are focused on our orbital platforms." Kate shook her head grimly. The Mars fleet consisted of 12 ships, all that remained of humanity's outer system defenses. Sending them against this alien armada would be like throwing rocks at a hurricane. But every minute they could delay the inevitable gave more civilian evacuation ships time to escape Earth. "Tell them they are authorized to engage at their discretion," Kate said. "All ships are to prioritize civilian protection over military objectives." High above Earth, the Vorthok fleet moved through human defenses like a knife through silk. Commander Zarakith watched the destruction from her flagship's bridge with professional interest. The humans were fighting exactly as predicted. They threw their forces forward in desperate waves, hoping that courage and determination could overcome impossible odds. The human weapons were primitive but numerous. Their ships were small and fast but fragile. Some of their tactics showed cleverness, like the group that tried to hide behind a space station before attacking. But cleverness without power was meaningless against Vorthok technology. "Commander, the human orbital platforms are destroyed," Captain Thokmar reported. "Our casualty count is 0. The humans have lost over 60% of their space forces." Zap nodded. This was proceeding faster than most conquests. Usually primitive species managed to damage at least 1 or 2 Vorthok vessels before being completely overwhelmed. These humans seemed even weaker than the intelligence reports suggested. On Luna Base, Jake Morrison prepared for the final phase of humanity's defense. His moon-based forces were the last organized military unit between the aliens and Earth. Once Luna Base fell, the planet would be defenseless against whatever the invaders planned to do. "Sir, we're getting reports from the surface," Lieutenant Amy Foster said, her voice tight with emotion. Dr. Lisa Parker at the research center says she's decoded some of their communications. It's not good news. Jake turned from the tactical display. What did she find? The aliens aren't planning to occupy Earth, sir. They're going to sterilize it completely. No prisoners, no survivors, no negotiation. They want the planet empty, so they can colonize it themselves. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. Humanity had always assumed that if aliens ever invaded, they would want slaves, or resources, or tribute. The idea that they simply wanted to wipe out every human being was almost incomprehensible. It meant there was no hope of surrender, no possibility of saving some part of humanity through submission. Dr. Lisa Parker worked frantically in her underground laboratory beneath the Rockies. She was a xenobiologist who had spent her career studying the possibility of alien life. Now that aliens had finally arrived, she wished they had stayed in the distant stars where they belonged. The Vorthok communications were complex but followed logical patterns. Their language used mathematical concepts that made translation possible with powerful computers. What Lisa had discovered made her wish she had never learned to decode their words. The aliens called humanity a contamination that needed to be cleansed from Earth. They had detailed plans for destroying every human settlement, including those on Mars and the asteroid colonies. They intended to use biological weapons to eliminate any humans who survived the initial bombardment. Even the evacuation ships fleeing Earth were marked for destruction. They've done this before, Lisa said to her assistant, Dr. Pete Anderson. The records show similar operations on dozens of other worlds. They're not conquerors, they're experimenters. Back in space, the alien fleet had reached Luna Base. Jake Morrison ordered all available ships to launch immediately. His forces consisted of 36 fighters, 12 heavy cruisers, and the base's defensive systems. Against the alien armada, it was like ants attacking an elephant. But Jake had one advantage the other human commanders lacked. He had studied every second of the earlier battles, analyzing how the alien weapons worked and where their ships positioned themselves during combat. He had noticed something that might be important, if he could survive long enough to test his theory. The alien shields seemed to have a brief moment of vulnerability when their weapons fired at maximum power. It lasted only a fraction of a second, but human computers might be fast enough to exploit that gap. Jake had programmed his fighters to coordinate their attacks for that precise moment. All units, execute Plan Delta, Jake commanded. Wait for my signal, then hit them with everything we have. The human ships accelerated toward the alien fleet in a desperate charge. Energy beams reached out to swat them down like flies. Jake watched his pilots die one by one as they pushed forward through the wall of alien fire. But some of them made it close enough to matter. Now, Jake shouted. 30 missiles and energy beams struck the lead alien ship at exactly the same moment its shields flickered. For the first time in the battle, human weapons actually touched alien metal. Armor plates buckled, and crystal arrays shattered. The damage was minor, but it was damage. Commander Zarakith felt her flagship shudder under the impact. Warning lights flashed on her bridge as reports came in of hull breaches and system failures. The damage was not serious, but it was unexpected. No primitive species had ever managed to hurt a Vorthok vessel before. How did they penetrate our shields? She demanded. Unknown, Commander. Their timing was perfect, striking at the exact moment of shield fluctuation. It should have been impossible for their primitive computers to calculate such precision. Zarakith stared at the human formation. Most of their ships were destroyed or disabled, but a few still fought on despite being hopelessly outnumbered. There was something different about these humans, something she had not encountered in previous conquests. Jake Morrison's ship was crippled and drifting, its engines destroyed and life support failing. Half his crew was dead, and the other half was badly wounded. But they had proven something important. The aliens were not invincible. They could be hurt, which meant they could be killed. as alien boarding ships approached his vessel. Jake made sure all critical data was transmitted to Earth. Someone needed to know about the shield vulnerability, even if it was too late to save humanity. Perhaps the evacuation ships could use this information to defend themselves during their escape. The aliens were coming aboard now. Jake could hear their heavy footsteps in the corridors outside his bridge. Soon he would meet his enemies face to face, and learn what kind of beings would destroy an entire species for the crime of existing on a planet they wanted for themselves. The airlock door exploded inward with a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Commander Zarakith stepped through the breach into the human vessel, her crystal armor gleaming under the emergency lights. Behind her came 4 Vorthok soldiers, their weapons ready to eliminate any remaining resistance. The human ship was smaller and more cramped than Vorthok vessels. The corridors were narrow and the ceiling was too low for her 7-foot frame. Everything looked primitive and hastily built, like the work of children playing with metal scraps. She could smell smoke and blood in the recycled air. Zarakith followed the signs toward what appeared to be the command center. Along the way she passed human bodies, some in military uniforms and others in simple work clothes. All of them had died fighting, even the ones who clearly were not soldiers. This was not unusual, but something about their faces caught her attention. They looked determined rather than terrified. The bridge door was already open when she arrived. Inside, she found the human commander kneeling beside a wounded crew member. The man was clearly dying from plasma burns across his chest, but the commander was speaking to him softly while applying medical supplies from a first aid kit. Jake Morrison looked up as the alien warriors entered his bridge. He saw a creature that was obviously female despite her non-human features. She was tall and elegant in a deadly way, with skin like polished stone and eyes that glowed with inner light. Her armor was covered with intricate patterns that probably meant something important in her culture. "You are the commander of this vessel," Zarakith said through her translation device. The words came out in heavily accented English. "Captain Jake Morrison, Earth Defense Force," Jake replied, continuing to work on his injured crew member. "This is Lieutenant Amy Foster. She needs medical attention." Zarakith stared at the human in confusion. Captured commanders usually reacted in predictable ways. They begged for mercy, or raged against their captors, or tried to negotiate for better treatment. They did not ignore their enemies to tend wounded soldiers, who were clearly beyond saving. "Your ship is destroyed, and your forces are eliminated," she said. "You are my prisoner. Your crew member is dying and cannot be saved." Jake looked up at her again. "Maybe you're right about Amy, but I have to try anyway. It's what we do." The alien commander watched as Jake carefully bandaged the lieutenant's wounds despite the obvious futility of the effort. The young woman was unconscious and losing blood faster than the primitive human medical supplies could replace it. Any rational being would recognize that she was beyond help, but Jake Morrison was not behaving rationally. He spoke to his dying crew member as if she could hear him, telling her that help was coming and that she was going to be fine. He held her hand while the monitors showed her vital signs fading away. When she finally stopped breathing, he closed her eyes gently and whispered something too quiet for the translation device to pick up. "Why did you waste time on a hopeless effort?" Zarakith asked. Jake stood up slowly, his hands still bloody from trying to save Amy Foster. "Because she was my responsibility. Because she trusted me to bring her home. Because someone should care when a good person dies." These concepts made no sense to Zarakith. The Vorthok way was simple and logical. The strong survived and the weak perished. Wasting resources on the doomed was inefficient and counterproductive. Yet this human had spent his final moments of freedom on exactly such a pointless gesture. "You have other wounded crew members," Jake said, nodding toward one of the Vorthok soldiers who was leaning against a wall. "That one has burn damage on his left arm." I have medical supplies that might help. Zaraketh followed Jake's gaze and saw that he was correct. Soldier Keekmuth had been injured when the human weapons briefly penetrated their shields. The wound was minor by Vorthok standards, but it was painful and would interfere with his combat effectiveness. You offer to help your captor? She asked. I offer to help someone who's hurt, Jake said simply. That's what medics do. Against all logic and protocol, Zaraketh found herself allowing the human to approach her wounded soldier. Jake examined the burn carefully, then applied some kind of cooling gel that seemed to ease the pain. His movements were gentle and professional, as if he treated enemy soldiers every day. Thank you, Keekmuth said in his own language, then repeated the words in broken English when he remembered the translation device. Jake smiled and patted the alien soldier on his uninjured shoulder. No problem. Try to keep it clean and dry, Zaraketh ordered her soldiers to secure the rest of the ship while she questioned the human commander. They moved to what appeared to be his private quarters, a small room barely large enough for a bed and a desk. The walls were covered with pictures of other humans, some in military uniform and others in civilian clothes. Your family? She asked, pointing at the photographs. Some of them. Others are friends, people I served with, people I've lost over the years. Jake sat down heavily on his bed, suddenly looking older than his 42 years. What happens now? Now, you answer my questions about human defenses and military capabilities. Jake laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. You've already destroyed our defenses and seen our military capabilities. What else do you need to know? Zaraketh studied the human carefully. He showed no signs of the fear or hatred she expected from captured enemies. Instead, he seemed genuinely curious about her and her mission. This was unprecedented in her experience. Why do you fight when you know you cannot win? She asked. Someone has to. If we don't fight, who will protect the people who can't protect themselves? Your resistance is meaningless. We will eliminate your species, regardless of what you do. Jake nodded sadly. Probably. But maybe we can slow you down enough for some of the evacuation ships to escape. Maybe some of our children will survive to find new homes among the stars. You sacrifice yourselves for strangers. We sacrifice ourselves for the future, for the possibility that something better than us might grow from what we leave behind. Zaraketh had conquered 47 worlds and defeated thousands of warriors from dozens of species. She had heard every possible argument for mercy, every plea for negotiation, every desperate attempt to find common ground between conqueror and conquered. But she had never heard anything like what this human was telling her. Jake Morrison was not asking her to spare humanity because they were strong or valuable or useful. He was not offering her wealth or knowledge or territory in exchange for mercy. Instead, he was calmly accepting defeat while explaining why he had chosen to fight anyway. Your people must hate you for leading them to destruction, she said. Some of them probably do, but most of them understand that we had to try. Even if we fail, even if we all die, at least we can say we stood up when it mattered. Zaraketh found herself asking questions she had never asked before. She wanted to understand how an entire species could choose hopeless resistance over practical surrender. She wanted to know what kind of culture produced individuals willing to die for abstract concepts like honor and duty and the welfare of future generations. As the hours passed, Jake Morrison told her stories about human history and human nature. He spoke of wars fought, not for conquest, but for freedom, of individuals who sacrificed everything to help people they had never met, of a species that somehow found hope in the darkest circumstances. For the first time in her long military career, Commander Zaraketh found herself questioning whether the Vorthok way was the only way intelligent beings could live. 3 days had passed since Jake Morrison became Zaraketh's prisoner. What should have been a simple interrogation had become something neither of them expected. The alien commander found herself returning to the humans' quarters again and again, drawn by conversations that challenged everything she thought she knew about strength and survival. "Show me more of your history," Zarakith said as she entered Jake's small room. She had started these visits to gather intelligence about human weaknesses, but now she came because she genuinely wanted to understand how these strange beings thought. Jake activated his personal computer, one of the few devices the aliens had, not destroyed. The screen filled with images from human history. He showed her paintings and sculptures, music and literature, scientific discoveries, and technological innovations. Each piece told a story about people who had created beauty and knowledge despite living in a dangerous universe. "This is music from a human named Ludwig van Beethoven," Jake said, playing a recording of the Ninth Symphony. "He wrote it when he was almost completely deaf. He created something beautiful that he could barely hear himself." Zarakith listened to the complex harmonies and wondered why anyone would waste time on such impractical activities. Vorthok culture focused on efficiency and conquest. They had no art except for weapons design, and no music except for battle songs. "What purpose does this serve?" she asked. "It makes people feel things. Hope, sadness, joy, wonder. It reminds us that there's more to existence than just survival." Jake showed her photographs of human cities and natural landscapes. He explained how humans had learned to live in every environment on their planet, from frozen Arctic regions to burning deserts. But what interested him most were the ways humans had changed themselves and their world through cooperation. "We used to fight each other constantly," Jake said, displaying images of ancient battlefields, wars between tribes, between nations, between different ways of thinking. But we learned that working together accomplished more than fighting alone. "The strong should rule the weak," Zarakith said, repeating the fundamental principle of Vorthok society. "Competition creates strength." "Competition can create strength," Jake agreed, "but cooperation creates wisdom. When different groups share their knowledge and resources, everyone benefits." He showed her the International Space Station, where humans from different nations had worked together to explore space. He explained how human scientists shared their discoveries freely, allowing knowledge to spread faster than any single group could develop it alone. "Your species shares information with potential enemies?" Zarakith asked. "Our species has learned that knowledge belongs to everyone. When one human makes a breakthrough in medicine or technology, we want all humans to benefit from it." This concept was completely alien to Zarakith. The Vorthok hoarded their discoveries, sharing them only with proven allies, and using them as weapons against their enemies. The idea of freely giving away valuable information seemed like insanity, but as Jake explained more about human cooperation, she began to see how it might work. Humans had eliminated diseases by sharing medical knowledge. They had prevented wars by establishing communication networks. They had even begun to repair environmental damage by coordinating global efforts. "You said your people want to destroy us because Earth is suitable for colonization," Jake said. "But why not share the planet instead? There's room for both species." Zarakith shook her head. "Vorthok do not share. We take what we need and eliminate competitors. Has that strategy worked well for your empire?" The question caught Zarakith off guard. She had never thought to evaluate the success of Vorthok methods beyond their obvious military victories. But now that Jake had raised the issue, she realized there were problems she had never considered. The Vorthok Empire was vast, but unstable. Conquered worlds required constant military occupation to prevent rebellions. Resources were consumed faster than they could be replaced. Each new conquest created more enemies who might someday unite against them. Meanwhile, the human internet showed her examples of voluntary cooperation between former enemies. Nations that had fought brutal wars now traded peacefully and shared technological innovations. They had even created international laws to prevent conflicts and protect civilian populations. "Your methods seem inefficient," Jake observed. You spend enormous resources conquering and controlling unwilling subjects. We spend similar resources helping willing partners become more productive. Dr. Lisa Parker worked frantically in her hidden laboratory, trying to decode more Vorthok communications. What she had discovered made her hands shake as she typed her reports. The alien empire was not as invincible as it appeared. Other conquered species were beginning to rebel across the galaxy. The Vorthok military was stretched thin, trying to maintain control over dozens of worlds. Some alien commanders were questioning their orders for the first time in centuries. The empire that had seemed unstoppable was showing cracks. Pete, look at these intercepts, she said to her assistant. The aliens are having internal disputes about Earth. Some of them want to follow standard extermination protocols, but others are suggesting alternatives. Dr. Pete Anderson studied the translated communications. It sounds like their commander is asking unusual questions about human culture. She's requesting detailed information about our social structures and cooperative behaviors. Lisa felt a spark of hope. Maybe someone up there is having second thoughts about genocide. Back on Zarakith's flagship, Jake Morrison made a request that surprised everyone. I want to show you something that might help you understand humans better, but I need access to your long-range communications array. You want to contact your people. I want to show you my people. The real ones, not the soldiers you've been fighting. Against her better judgment, Zaraketh granted the request. She accompanied Jake to the communications center, where he used human frequencies to access Earth's civilian networks. What appeared on the screens was not what she expected. Instead of military preparations or panic, the displays showed ordinary humans going about their daily lives. Children playing in parks, despite the alien threat overhead. Doctors treating patients in hospitals. Teachers conducting classes for students who might not live to see graduation. These people know they're probably going to die, Jake said quietly. But they're still trying to make their last days meaningful. They're still taking care of each other. Zarakith watched a human father reading bedtime stories to his young daughter. She saw medical workers staying at their posts to help injured civilians instead of fleeing to safety. She witnessed ordinary people sharing food and shelter with strangers who had lost their homes to the bombardment. Why don't they run? She asked. Some of them do. The evacuation ships are full of families with children, but others stay because someone needs to maintain basic services. Someone needs to care for the people who can't leave. Jake showed her footage of human rescue workers pulling survivors from damaged buildings. He displayed messages from the evacuation ships, where parents sent final recordings to children they would never see again. He revealed a species that faced extinction with dignity instead of despair. Your empire has conquered 47 worlds, Jake said. How many of those species chose to spend their final days helping each other instead of seeking revenge against their conquerors? Zaraketh had no answer. In her experience, defeated species usually turned violent and chaotic in their last moments. They fought among themselves, blamed their leaders for failing to protect them, and often committed atrocities against their own people. None of them had ever responded to conquest with the calm compassion she was seeing from humanity. Perhaps, she said slowly, humans are different from other species we have encountered. Jake looked at her with something that might have been hope. Perhaps the Vorthok could be different too. For the first time in her life, Commander Zarakith began to wonder if strength and conquest were the only measures of a successful civilization. The message from Vorthok High Command arrived during what had become Jake Morrison's daily conversation with Commander Zarakith. The alien leader's expression darkened as she read the orders on her personal communicator. Jake could not understand the harsh alien language, but her body language told him the news was not good. What does it say? He asked quietly. Zarakith looked at him with something that might have been regret. The High Command has reviewed our progress reports. They are displeased with the slow pace of Earth's destruction. I am ordered to execute all human prisoners immediately and complete the sterilization of your planet within 2 standard cycles. Jake nodded calmly, as if he had been expecting this news. How long do we have? In your time measurement, approximately 18 hours. And there's no possibility of changing their minds. Zarakith set down her communicator and stared at the wall of Jake's small prison quarters. Over the past week, these conversations had become the most important part of her day. She found herself looking forward to learning new things about human culture and philosophy. The idea of ending these discussions forever filled her with an emotion she had never experienced before. The High Command does not change its decisions. The Vorthok way has remained unchanged for over 1,000 years. Jake was quiet for several minutes, processing this information. Then he asked a question that surprised her. What do you want? To do what I want is irrelevant. I am a soldier, following orders. But if you could choose freely, without consequences or obligations, what would you want to do? Zarakith had never been asked such a question. Vorthok society did not encourage individual desires that conflicted with collective goals. Soldiers followed orders, workers performed their duties, and leaders made decisions based on proven strategies. Personal preferences were considered weakness, but Jake Morrison had taught her to think about concepts like personal choice and moral responsibility. He had shown her examples of humans who chose to do what they believed was right, even when it cost them everything. These ideas had taken root in her mind like seeds growing in alien soil. I find myself questioning whether destruction is always the correct response to difference, she said carefully. Your species has shown me alternatives I had not considered. Then maybe it's time to try one of those alternatives. Zer stood up and began pacing the small room. If I disobey direct orders from High Command, I will be declared a traitor. My own soldiers will be ordered to arrest or kill me. The fleet will be given to another commander who will complete the mission. Maybe, or maybe some of your soldiers have been having the same doubts you're having. Jake had noticed changes in the Vorthok crew members he encountered during his captivity. They no longer treated him with casual contempt. Some of them had even started asking questions about human customs and beliefs. The alien soldier, whose burn he had treated now, brought him extra food and medical supplies. Change has to start somewhere, Jake continued. Someone has to be the first to say that the old way isn't working anymore. Dr. Lisa Parker received an encrypted message from deep space that made her heart race with hope. The transmission came from a Vorthok vessel, but the content was in perfect English. Someone aboard the alien fleet was trying to communicate secretly with Earth's leaders. This is Commander Zarakith of the Vorthok Empire, the message began. I wish to discuss terms for a cessation of hostilities. I cannot guarantee the cooperation of my superiors, but I am willing to explore alternatives to the complete destruction of your species. Lisa immediately forwarded the message to Admiral Kate Sullivan and every other human leader she could contact. For the first time since the invasion began, there was a possibility that humanity might survive this encounter. But the message also contained a warning. Other Vorthok commanders were already suspicious of Zarakith's unusual behavior. If her communications with Earth were discovered, she would be replaced by someone more committed to following traditional methods. Admiral Sullivan sent a careful reply through the same encrypted channel. We appreciate your willingness to explore alternatives. What would you need from us to proceed with negotiations? Zarakith's response was both simple and impossible. I need proof that humans can coexist peacefully with other species without attempting to dominate or exploit them. The High Command believes that all intelligent life forms are natural competitors who will eventually become threats to each other. Jake Morrison smiled when Zarakith told him about the secret communications with Earth's leaders. That's easy to prove. Humans have been practicing peaceful coexistence for centuries with other humans. The High Command argues that different species cannot achieve the same cooperation. Then let's show them they're wrong. Jake proposed an idea that was both brilliant and dangerous. He would remain as Zarakith's prisoner, but she would announce to both fleets that negotiations were beginning. If the talks failed, he would accept execution without resistance. If they succeeded, he would serve as humanity's permanent ambassador to the Vorthok Empire. "You would trust your life to my ability to convince my superiors?" Zarakith asked. "I trust your judgment more than I trust your superiors," Jake replied. "Besides, what choice do we have? If we don't try this, everyone dies anyway." Zarakith made the most difficult decision of her military career. She transmitted a message to both the Vorthok High Command and Earth's leadership, announcing her intention to explore peaceful alternatives to conquest. She knew this act would be seen as treason by many of her own people, but Jake Morrison had taught her that some principles were more important than personal safety. The response from High Command was swift and furious. Zarakith was ordered to cease all unauthorized communications immediately and proceed with planetary sterilization. When she refused, they dispatched a replacement commander with orders to arrest her and complete the mission. But something unexpected happened. Nearly half of Zarakith's fleet declared their support for her position. Alien soldiers who had spent their entire lives following orders without question suddenly found themselves choosing between duty and conscience. The humans had shown them that there might be better ways to live than constant warfare and domination. The Vorthok Empire found itself facing its first civil war in over 1,000 years. Some commanders remained loyal to traditional methods, while others supported Zarakith's experiments with cooperation and negotiation. The conflict spread to other parts of the empire as conquered species saw an opportunity to rebel against their oppressors. Jake Morrison stood beside Commander Zarakith on the bridge of her flagship as they watched the galaxy begin to change. Neither of them had expected their conversations to have such far-reaching consequences. They had simply been two individuals from different species trying to understand each other. "Do you think this will work?" Zarakith asked. "I don't know," Jake admitted, "but I know it's worth trying. Change is always difficult, but the alternative is staying trapped in patterns that don't work anymore." The evacuation ships carrying human refugees received an unexpected escort as they fled toward distant stars. Vorthok vessels commanded by officers loyal to Zarakith protected them from attacks by Imperial loyalists. For the first time in galactic history, members of a conquering species were actively helping their former enemies escape to safety. Earth itself became the site of an unprecedented experiment. Human and Vorthok representatives worked together to establish new forms of cooperation between species. The planet that had been scheduled for destruction became a symbol of hope for billions of beings across the galaxy. Jake Morrison never returned to active military duty. Instead, he became humanity's first ambassador to the reformed Vorthok Republic, helping to negotiate treaties and trade agreements that benefited both species. His friendship with Zarakith, now the elected leader of her people's government, became the foundation for a new era of interspecies cooperation. The galaxy was still a dangerous place, filled with conflicts and challenges, but for the first time in centuries, intelligent beings had proved that those challenges could be met through cooperation rather than conquest. The human captain, who had faced impossible odds with quiet dignity, had helped teach an entire civilization that true strength came not from the ability to destroy enemies, but from the wisdom to turn enemies into friends. Commander Zarakith had faced countless warriors in her military career, but Captain Jake Morrison had left her speechless, not through force of arms, but through the simple power of compassion and hope. Their encounter changed not just their own lives, but the destiny of every living being in the universe.